now going to move into the interior finishing. And even though I may go through this a little lighter and breezier than I have the other sections, don't let that fool you. As far as I'm concerned, this is the hardest part of building a home. Anybody can get a home to this point, but it takes the good builders to tidy up all these loose ends and get the customer satisfied and moved in. It's during this phase that you will spend the bulk of the money. It's a very exciting phase. If you're dealing with a builder, it's normally during this phase that the owner begins to slowly shift and hate their builder, and vice versa. It's kind of a two-way street. But this, as far as I'm concerned, is the hardest part of building a home, and it is very, very exciting. So after you get the insulation inspection, if you have, for example, on the terrace or basement level, if you plan to stain the concrete, if you'll look at 24/7, we've got in some basic things you need to know about staining concrete. One thing they prefer doing is to go in and stain the concrete before you hang any drywall or anything like this. So after you finish the insulation, clean that area real good, like on a terrace level or anywhere you're going to be staining your concrete, and go ahead and get the concrete stained. Now, after you finish the insulation inspection, you're now authorized to cover everything up, let's say with drywall. Now, some of you may call it sheetrock. Those are both brand names. It's really gypsum board. I prefer to call it drywall, but I've been around home building so long, I also call it sheetrock. So whatever makes you feel good, you can call it either one. I guess for my commercial work, I'm just more used to calling it drywall instead of sheetrock. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect, I want to encourage you up to this point to be working on like about a 7 and an 8. Now, from this point on, I want you to tighten up and really do what you can to go for like about an 8 to a 9. Now, don't expect 10. Don't expect perfect. If you get 10, you lucked out on it. But I do want you to tighten up and go for like about an 8 to a 9, because everything you do from this point on will be seen forevermore. And the first person that can really do it to you is the drywall sub. And I think part of the problem is this. I know when I was in high school in Atlanta, I used to paint airplanes out at the Atlanta airport. And people used to bring in their old dilapidated airplanes, and we'd strip them down, prime them, and paint them. And the company I worked for, they wouldn't give enough time for the first coat to adequately dry before we tape it out and spray on the second coat. And when we'd pull the tape off, we would pull off part of the paint, and then we'd get an artist brush and kind of touch it up. Well, when we finished, all I could see was a bunch of touch-up. The customer would come in, and all they could see was their beautifully painted airplane. Well, you've got a similar situation here in that you've been looking at this old rough frame of a home for maybe months. And in walks the drywall subcontractor. And believe me, this is a subcontractor. You never, ever want to fool with drywall. This is like moving Ringling Brothers Circus around with 300 elephants. And they'll deliver all this drywall, and then they'll get in there and they will hang the drywall. And after they hang it, they'll do what we call tape and finish, or tape and mud the joints. After that first coat dries, they'll come in and they'll put on a second coat. And after that dries, they'll come in and put on a real wide third coat called a skim coat. And then after that dries, they'll texture the ceiling or stipple the ceiling, if you know what I mean. There in some parts of the country, they will texture the walls, and they'll do all this. And then after that dries, they'll come in with sanding blocks on poles and sand everything that's real smooth, or that is supposed to be smooth. And then the drywall sub wants to be paid. Well, if you ever get into buying old cars, you know how you like to get them in the light and look down the side to see if they've ever been wrecked? Well, when you cut all your lights on in the future, all these flaws are going to leap out at you, and you're not going to think so highly of the drywall sub. So it's very important that you check the drywall now. A couple of things I want to mention on the drywall is, first of all, you want to make sure your roof is installed before you hang the drywall. You do not want to start hanging the drywall before the roof is installed. And one thing I learned from my commercial work that I do in residential is, instead of using drywall nails, I want them to use drywall screws. By using drywall screws, I don't have near the nail pops like you do with the nails. Now, if they want to use a couple of nails just to tack it up and hold it in place and then screw the rest of it, no problem. And these subs, they do commercial, residential. They're used to using the screw guns. This is no big deal for them. So use the drywall screw. You want to take your photos, your digital photos or your camcorder recording. You want to go through the home, make sure they have uncovered all recessed cans, all outlets, all switches, anything that could be covered up. You just want to check each room to make sure it's uncovered. You cannot imagine how often some of this stuff gets covered up, and sometimes it can be extremely hard to find later. After they hang the drywall, you don't want to wait till they finish. I would recommend that you get your cabinet subcontractor in there to measure for your cabinets. Now, I'm kind of pushing the envelope here because you may think that's going to throw you way behind schedule, and it could throw you behind schedule. And I'd rather you be behind schedule than to have a major mess up with the cabinets. Because if they measured the cabinets before the drywall and then you come in there and make some alterations or something and it throws the cabinet measurement off, that could create a lot of problems later. Once you hang the drywall, that is the exact measurement for that cabinet, and everybody knows where it's going to go. So if you measure, it's right after they hang the drywall, because they've got a lot more work to do, they can go ahead and get started on those cabinets, and that will minimize mistakes in building your cabinets. I want to remind you on the cabinets to remember the work triangle that we talked about earlier in the program. And it's very important that you know all your appliance measurements when you're dealing with the cabinet sub and the specifications on those appliances. Okay, back to the drywall. Drywall is not perfect. And when you go in there and you paint those walls, especially if you use some kind of eggshell paint, oh my gosh, you cannot imagine all the flaws in the drywall. What we will do is on the ceiling especially, we will have the drywall sub spray on the ceiling a product by USG, which is United States Gypsum, USG, called Tough Hide. Now there, I think, are similar products to Tough Hide out there, but it's like a real thick drywall compound that they will spray on the ceiling, and what it will do is it covers a multitude of flaws in the drywall, and this gives us a very nice, well-painted ceiling. If you spray the Tough Hide on the ceiling, it also acts as a primer, so your painter should give you a little price break because they do not have to prime the ceiling. In larger homes, in an entry foyer or a two-story family room or something like this, this is where you see a lot of flaws in drywall. Understand that a sheet of drywall, like a 4x8 sheet, along the 8-foot side, the edge of that drywall, if you looked at it, it's kind of beveled. And the reason it's beveled so that when you put two edges together, there's a little, like a little indentation where those two edges come together. And when they put that drywall tape and mud in there, it smooths off nice and level, and it looks nice and smooth on the wall. On the end of a board, the 4-foot side, those edges are not beveled, and we call those the butt joint. And when they butt those two ends together, if they don't have a wide enough skim coat, a lot of times that butt joint will stick out like a sore thumb. And in a two-story room where you may have some of these butt joints, that's where it really shows up when you have your lighting on, especially at night. And so what we'll do in these big two-story areas is we will really make sure they have a nice wide skim coat on those butt joints, and we will spray those areas with this tough hide, those walls, just to minimize flaws in those areas so that entry foyer, a big two-story family area, really looks nice. In your larger homes, we will spray every wall in every room with the tough hide. But that's normally in the more expensive homes that will do that. As you get further into the luxury market, you will see some people specify what we call a Class 5 drywall job. And what they'll do there is they'll take that drywall compound and they will skim every ceiling, every wall. They'll sand it and they'll skim it again. I've seen some cases where they would do it 3 times. Oh man, that is fantastic. It's almost like the old plaster jobs that you would see, this Class 5 finish on drywall. And if you're doing an eggshell paint, oh, it's beautiful. It's darn near perfect. And it costs a significant amount of money, which is why you normally do not see this except in the multi-million-dollar homes. But even though you can't afford a Class 5 drywall finish, I would use the tough hide for the ceilings and for those big 2-story walls in an entry foyer, in any kind of part of the main part, a 2-story dining room or family room, to cover up those flaws. And your drywall sub is who will furnish and install this. Also, be sure to tell the drywall sub if you're not going to be using any crown molding, if you're in parts of the country where we use a lot of crown molding. Because if they're used to being in homes where the customer is installing crown molding, they do not finish the top of the wall as nice as they will if you're not going to have crown molding. So again, if you're not going to have crown molding, it's important that you tell the drywall subcontractor that you're not going to have it. You want to tell the drywall sub that you want them to check the drywall using a spotlight. They're not going to be wild about this, but they're better equipped to use this spotlight than you are. If you got into the home with a spotlight yourself, it will show every flaw in the drywall, and you should not know there are that many flaws in drywall. By the drywall sub using a light, he's going to know what's acceptable and what's not. And by using that light, he'll go through and repair the drywall. Now, some of your drywall subs may come back to you and say, wait until the painter primes the walls, and then we'll do the bulk of the repairs because we can see the flaws a little better. That is true. When the painter primes the walls, you're going to be able to see more flaws than you could before they primed the walls. But that is not the time to repair drywall. You should repair as much of it as you can before the painter primes the walls. Now, because what the drywall sub just told you is true, I want you to hold back at least 10% of the drywall sub's money until the painter primes the walls. Then when the painter primes the walls, you're going to see the last flaws you've overlooked, and the drywall sub needs to come in and repair those at this time. But I want to stress, you tell the drywall sub to use a spotlight to check the drywall. And if they're not going to use it, tell them you're going to get in there and use it, and they're not going to be excited about you seeing all these flaws. Another thing you want to tell your drywall sub is around your tubs, around your showers, any place you're putting ceramic tile on the walls, except, like a backsplash behind the cabinet. But around a tub or shower, if you're going to be putting ceramic tile on the wall, tell the drywall sub to leave off the drywall where you plan to put ceramic tile. So you're going to need to know how high you're going to go with the tile, where it's going to be located, and you will leave the drywall off of these areas. And I'll explain what you're going to do with those areas later. If you've got a room where you're going to be installing paneling, I've seen some people go in and leave the drywall off of these rooms, and they will put the paneling right on top of the studs. If you go up and kind of rap on the paneling, it sounds kind of hollow. What I like to do is tell the drywall sub to take all of his scrap. He's got just a trainload of scrap. And if he would, just cover those walls where I'm going to have paneling with just that scrap drywall. They don't have to tape and finish and mud the joints. Just put that scrap drywall up there, and then go in there, or when you go in there and put the paneling on top of that scrap drywall, it just gives it a good solid feel and sound, and I think it gives you a nicer, neater job. It's their responsibility to pick up all this scrap, and sometimes they'll bring a truck out there to haul it off so they don't use up your container. But if not, they can pile it in your container if you allow them, and they'll pick up all this scrap, and you'll just about fill a container with their scrap, and they got to clean the home and sweep it out real good and just kind of knock off the floor that scrap drywall mud that's gotten real hard, and they'll kind of bust it off and sweep the home out real good. And you want to clean the home out real good at this time. After you finish the drywall, there's a little window of opportunity here that I want you to take advantage of, and your painter's going to want to take advantage of it. After you finish the drywall, before you install any trim or anything, get your painter in there to prime every wall in every room of that home, except any of those walls where you may have sprayed on that tough hide that I talked about. But they can get in there and they can just go like gangbusters and spray this primer all through the home, and you let them in there to do this before you go any further. One other thing, I recommend that you tell the painter to use an off-white color for the primer. That way you're going to be able to see if they missed any of the walls, because if they use a real white primer, which kind of matches the sheetrock compound, it's kind of hard to tell where they may or may not have missed priming some areas. So again, tell the painter to use a little bit of an off-white primer so you can make sure they got everything primed properly. If you remember earlier, I talked about during the rough-in, having the electrician prepare the home for temporary power. After they do all this painting and stuff, I want you to go ahead. You may have already gone ahead and applied for temporary service, and they'll have to come out. The inspector will probably inspect the home to see that it is okay for temporary service. And they'll go ahead and put a meter on the home, and that way, however many outlets the electrician prepared for temporary service, those outlets are going to be hot. They can disconnect the temporary power pole, and now all your subs, they can work on the inside and plug into those 3 or 4 outlets that are now hot on the inside of the home. Also, if it's in the wintertime and you've got really extremely cold weather, you can coordinate things to set your heat pumps or compressors outside, or get things hooked up to where you can run, let's say, the gas line, make sure it's to the home. What I'm leading up to is you can get everything in position to cut heat on the home, which is very, very nice in the middle of the winter. If you cannot cut heat on the home, I encourage you to go in the winter. If you are building in the winter, go to your tool rental places, and they have these big heaters. And I'm not talking about these little kerosene heaters that look like a jet engine. No, these are large kerosene heaters that they can place in the home, and they will heat the entire home just about. And so if you are building in the middle of the winter, even though you may have power, but you don't have everything to where you can cut heat on the home, go and rent one of those large, for lack of a better word, industrial grade heaters, kerosene heaters. They'll bring in and set up in a central location and fire that boy up, and it will warm that home up, and it makes it so much nicer for not only you, but for everybody that's working in there. After they finish priming all the walls, you can now have your hardwood flooring subcontractor on the job to install your real hardwood floor planks. Now, I'm not talking about your pre-finished stuff. No, I do not put that in now. You'll find out when to put that. This is the stuff you will sand and finish later. Ideally, they will deliver the hardwood flooring several days prior to installation to let it kind of acclimate itself to the surrounding air and the humidity in the air. That is the ideal way of doing it. However, a lot of times by doing it this way, you're installing the floors. You're not going to sand them and finish them until later. Sometimes they'll just deliver them and go ahead and install them because they're going to be sitting there for a period of time before you sand and finish. And it seems they adjust okay. So I'm okay with that. But in the world of master building, you would bring the hardwood flooring out there and let it sit on the job several days before you actually normally go perpendicular to your floor joist or floor trusses. And so the hardwood flooring sub, he will change direction of the floor. For example, on a large home, on let's say the first floor level, you may have the floor joist going one direction in one area and an opposite direction in another area. And the hardwood floor sub will change the direction of the hardwood flooring so it is perpendicular to the floor joist or floor truss. Just understand that's going to take place, and that's how they should do it for purposes of nailing and for purposes of strength. Between the hardwood flooring and your subflooring, they need to put a layer of felt, and it is normally that 15-pound felt. Some of you call it tar paper or roofing paper. If they do not put that layer of felt in between those two hard surfaces, in a short period of time, no more than a year, your home is going to have more squeaks in it than you can shake a stick at. And as I mentioned earlier, when people walk through your home now, it's going to go squeak, squeak, and they're going to think cheap, cheap. Anytime you got two hard surfaces going together, plywood and plywood, plywood and any kind of underlayment, plywood or Advantech and hardwood flooring, you've got to put a layer of 15-pound felt or felt in between that to stop those squeaks. And they don't nail it down or glue it down. They just lay it right in between. Also on the hardwood flooring, like if you're going to install hardwood flooring in the kitchen, I recommend you just run the hardwood flooring from wall to wall, and your cabinets are going to sit on top of it. Now, yeah, you're going to waste a little money there, but I think you get a much nicer, neater job. And if you want to really negotiate with the hardwood floor sub, you can say, well, you're not going to have to finish where the cabinets are going to be, so I'd like a little price break on the finishing, but you'll just be a lot happier, believe me, if you'll just run the hardwood flooring from wall to wall. Also, I want to quickly mention your hardwood flooring is normally graded like number 1, number 2, and number 3. Now, they also make a select grade, but select is normally used for like furniture and stuff like this. Most builders will tend to use like a number 1. However, some consumers they'll go with like a number 3 because a number 3 may be shorter boards. There may be more knots in it, and they like the shorter boards or they like the knots. They think it gives the floor a lot more character, so they'll go with number 3, not only to save money, but they like the look of that floor. If you're going to have on the floor registers a wood vent instead of a metal vent, you need to tell the hardwood floor sub this so he will plan on installing a wood register instead of a metal register. And before the hardwood sub gets to the job, you need to be clear in your mind what kind of design you want in the flooring, what kind of pattern that you want, any kind of borders, stuff like this. I encourage you to decide on this before the hardwood floor shows up and discuss it with the hardwood floor while you're negotiating the price on the job, instead of just showing up and then y'all sorting this out on the job. Because then, it leads to confusion. It adds to the cost, which could surprise you. So this needs to be worked out up front. One other thing I want to mention about the hardwood flooring is that this recording, wider planks like 3.5 inches or wider are becoming more and more popular. A problem with the wider planks is they will tend to, as they dry, they will tend to cup, and that just can be a problem. One way to help compensate for this is to use an alternating wide plank and narrow plank, a wide plank and a narrow plank, which I think looks very good, but it helps kind of hold the wider plank in place so that you don't have as much of a problem with it cupping over time. I just wanted you to be aware of that. At the same time they're installing your hardwood flooring, you can have your plumber install your garden tubs, your jetty tubs. This is when I would prefer to install it, because a lot of people that could damage these tubs, they're now gone. They're not in the job, primarily the drywall sub. And they will slide these garden tubs in place or these jetty tubs in place. And these tubs need to be sitting on the floor. You do not want that tub resting on the top deck or top rim of that tub. The bottom of the tub, when you think about how much water is in that thing, it needs to be sitting squarely on the floor. So they will slide that tub in place. The plumber will actually hook up the water line, drain lines, and everything to this tub. You need to be aware of where the motor is on a jetty tub, because you've got to have that access door for the motor. The next carpenter that's showing up on the job, the interior trim carpenter, is who we will hire to build a skirt around the face of that tub the way we want it. And that skirt, you will cover it with tile, marble, or you can cover it with wood panels. I will say the wood panel makes it very easy to accommodate an access door, kind of like a kitchen cabinet. It makes it very easy to accommodate an access door so you can reach that motor for your jetted tubs. Also, if you are going to have panels, you can have your cabinet sub match that panel with your bathroom vanities, so it looks like just after they like finish all the hardwood flooring, you will have all your interior trim delivered to the job site. This includes all the interior doors. I would encourage you to have your salesman for the trim company measure all the rough openings to make sure everything's okay. Measure the quantity of base molding you need, crown molding you need, and do all this measurement for you. This salesman will also measure for any attic access doors, like a pull-down disappearing stairs, to make sure those rough openings are okay. They will also measure for any small access doors going into some of your attic space. And they will not only measure for these, they can build them. So they'll be ready to install at that point in time. And your pull-down attic stairs, in areas where you have inspection departments, they'll normally require that those stairs be insulated. Even if you're not in an area where they have an inspection department, I recommend you insulate your pull-down attic stairs. And when you order these pull-down attic stairs, you will order them already insulated. This is not something you'll have to do yourself. Again, like your exterior doors and windows, I want the salesman to label these interior doors with the rough opening. So rough opening A will correspond to door A, and so on and so forth. And that makes it a lot easier when they deliver all these doors, that you know where they're going. But the first thing you want the trim carpenter to do, which is labor, you're going to furnish all the material, is you want to tell the trim carpenter to hang all the interior doors in the home. And you notice I waited until all the hardwood flooring was done before I hanged the interior doors. It makes the job a lot nicer and neater by doing this. Some builders go in and hang the doors and then do the hardwood flooring, and I just don't think you get as nice as neat a job, and it's a little more aggravation for the trim carpenter. You've got to be thinking on the rough opening, though, that you're adding that like 3/4 of an inch to the floor, which means the rough opening should be adjusted enough that you can accommodate the door and the hardwood flooring, the height of the rough opening. Another reason I want you to get these doors hung as soon as possible is because I want you to get the ceramic tile subcontractor in there to get started on all the ceramic tile floors. So do all the interior doors first before they start anything else. And also tell the trim carpenter when they begin doing the base molding in the home, do not put any base molding in those rooms where you have ceramic tile. Also be conscious of where the cabinets are going. You do not want to put any base molding where the cabinets are going. So just cover this with the trim carpenter and they'll get started and they'll be doing all the base molding and crown molding and door casing and window casing. You can look at 24/7 and see what all these little areas are called, like around a window, for example. You got the window stool and window stop. That's why you want the trim salesman to order all this stuff, because there's a lot of little things that he's aware of because he's in the industry that you would not necessarily be aware of ordering this stuff yourself. And the thing you don't want is the trim carpenter showing up and you're missing a bunch of stuff. One thing that I found was very helpful is to create a board where if you're going to have different trim throughout the home, for example, we'll put nicer trim in the main part of the home and we will not have quite as nice a trim in the secondary part of the home. Same with door casing and base molding. So if your home is pretty good size, what we'll do is create a board where I will have just samples of casing on the board and crown molding and base molding. And I will label these like casing A, casing B, crown B, base A, base B. And then what I do, I just print it on my computer, but you can do it by hand on a separate piece of paper, 8.5 by 11. I will write down in a given room, let's say the room's going to have crown A, casing B, and base B. And I write that on a piece of paper and I will stick it to the wall with blue painter's tape because you don't want to use masking tape or something that would pull the backing off the drywall. And I'll stick this in every room. That way, when the trim carpenter walks into a room, he quickly looks at that and he knows what crown molding I want to use, what door casing and window casing I want to use, and what base molding I want to use, and anything else I might want to denote here. And that way, they're not accidentally doing it wrong in a room and I have to get them to tear it down and redo it. What a waste of money and time. And so this clears up everything so there's no confusion and you don't have to be there walking around all the time saying, do this here. As I mentioned earlier, I'll have the trim carpenter build any frames around your garden tubs. And by the way, on waiting on this frame, this makes it a lot easier for the plumber to go ahead and plumb that tub. Because if you do it after the frame's up, it really makes the job a lot harder for the plumber. This way the plumber can get everything just right, and then you can build the frame and it's just right without any problem. You could hire your trim carpenter to build and install all your stair rails and balcony rails and stuff like this. As I mentioned earlier, I'd normally hire the company that prefabs the stairs. I hire them to go ahead and just do all the rails in the home. Any stair rails, balcony rails, everything. I just feel I get a nicer job. They're going to stand behind it. And I just like doing this more than allowing the trim carpenter, although I dare say most trim carpenters can clearly build stairs, rails, stairs, everything. That's just the way I do it, and I like it. Also, the trim carpenter can build any mantel or fireplace surround according to what you want. If you got a picture of something you want, they're pretty good at copying that picture. Or you may purchase a fireplace surround that is already constructed and it'll be delivered to the job site and the trim carpenter would install it. A couple of things I want to mention about the trim carpenter is where two pieces of wood come together, like crown molding, where it comes together in a corner. Those joints need to be nice and tight and neat, and it should not look like they need a bunch of caulking. If they look like it needs a bunch of caulking, they are not doing the job to my satisfaction. For that reason, go look at some of their work and look at it before the painter gets hold of it, because a good painter can make a sorry trim carpenter look great. and see if those joints are nice and tight and neat. I will say if you're going to prime and paint the trim, they are tight and neat, but they're not just perfect. If you are going to go with stain grade trim and you're going to stain it, those joints need to be darn near perfect. And some trim carpenters charge extra if they're dealing with stain grade material because they know those joints have got to be precision, and that takes them a little bit longer to cut them that neat. But even if you're not doing stain grade, if you're going to prime and paint it, the joints still need to be tight. They don't need to be as tight with stain grade, but they need to be pretty darn tight. One area I've noticed where they a lot of trim carpenters drop the ball is, these doors will come on what we call pre-hung door units. They just stick them up there and nail them up and go to the next one. And for that reason, they could have kind of a rookie hanging those doors, and the trim carpenters just going like crazy in the rest of the home. Well, for that reason, if the trim carpenter is letting a rookie hang the door, there could be problems with the doors. So here's what I want you to do with the doors. I'm checking the doors. When the trim carpenter has completed the door, now he's not putting the locks on them or anything like that. I want you to go and open the door about halfway open and just let go of it. If that door swings on open by itself and hits the wall or closes by itself, it needs adjusting. Close the door and stand back away from the door, and you will see a little margin if you're on the side of the door opposite where the doorstop is. And you will see an example of this at 24/7. But if you'll stand back from the door, you'll notice there's a little gap between the door and the door frame or the door jamb. In the world of master building, that gap should be a certain distance. I'm not that critical about that gap. The big thing is that gap needs to be nice and even and parallel all the way around the door, 3 sides of the door. I've seen situations where the door and the door jamb would separate to the point you could see light through there. Years ago, I had a good friend that had a very expensive condo in downtown Atlanta. You could see people in the bathrooms. Of course, he loved it. He never would let us fix that door. But you stand back away from that door and you just look at it, and that margin between the door and the door jamb needs to be nice and even and parallel. Okay. Get on the back side of the door where the door stop is. When you close a door will hit what is called a door stop. Close the door, let it hit the door stop, and I want you to look at all 3 sides of that door, mainly 2 sides, the top and the lock side. And when that door hits the door stop, it should be touching or almost touching everywhere. I've closed the door and the door may hit the stop at the top, and at the bottom, there may be a 1-inch gap between the door and the doorstop. If the trim carpenter convinces you the door is warped, and that's why it's doing it, then you get the salesman out there and they need to replace that door. But if it's not warped, the trim carpenter needs to adjust it. Where you have double doors coming together, if you look across the top of the double door, it needs to be nice. Where they meet, it needs to be nice and even, not cockeyed. If it's not nice and even, it needs to be adjusted. In the center where the 2 doors join together, look at the center. It should be nice and neat and parallel from top to bottom. If it's not, it needs adjusting. After the trim carpenter has set all the interior doors, I want you to get the ceramic tile subcontractor in there. Now, even though I said subcontractor, a lot of times the ceramic tile sub is labor. You will furnish all the material. Have the ceramic tile sub get in there and do all your floors first. Nothing else, just floors. I want to get those floors done because I'm going to have cabinets coming. I want to be able to finish up also the trim in the bathrooms. So do the floors first. Regarding ceramic tile on the floor, I've got to admit I'm kind of from the old school, and the old school is your tile sub would install on the subflooring. Now they'll put felt down to protect the subflooring, but on top of the subflooring, they'll put a 3/4 inch bed of concrete, solid concrete, and they'll reinforce it many times with wire lath, and they will put this on top of the subflooring, and we call this a mortar bed. And a tile sub that really knows how to put down a nice mortar bed, oh, I just really like this, and it's a great surface to put tile on, especially if you have large pieces of tile or marble or something like this. So my preference is the mortar bed. However, more and more builders, and there's times that I'll do this, instead of putting down a mortar bed, because for example, you may not have room for a 3/4 inch mortar bed and then let's say 1/4 inch tile on top of that. So what they may put down on top of the subflooring is what we call a tile backer or a tile backer board. A lot of builders will use Durock. I have no real problem with Durock, but between you and me, I do not like Durock. It's extremely heavy. To me, it's difficult to work with. And the other thing I don't like about Durock or any of these cement boards like Wonder Board is they allow moisture to penetrate through them. And what I like is a tile backer. My favorite is called Den-Shield, or a tile backer by Den-Shield. And it does not allow water to go through it. It's easy to use, easy to cut. On the Den-Shield, look at 24/7 to see the specifications, or go to their website and see the specifications on how it should be installed, and they should install it per the specifications. For example, where two pieces come together, they've got to put a piece of tape or something or mastic where they come together. And they will screw the heck out of it, or they can nail it, like with ring shank nails or something, or roofing nails, galvanized roofing nails, and I have no problem with that. But I'm okay with the tile backer. My preference, many times though, is the 3/4 inch. After they finish all the tile or marble or whatever you're using on the floors, and they're out of the way of cabinets coming in and stuff like this, they can now get started on any showers or tub surrounds or anything like this. Again, around your tubs and showers, here is where I've kind of backed off the old way. The old way is what they used to do is they would nail a piece of wire lath to the studs, and on top of that wire lath, they would put a layer of cement called the scratch coat. You can see pictures of this at 24/7. After that scratch coat dries, they'll put a second layer on there real smooth called the brown coat. And after that dries, and by the way, the scratch coat and the brown coat, this is just like doing hard coat stucco. And after that dries, on top of that brown coat, they will attach the ceramic tile. And that's the old way of doing it. And I used to really stand on and prefer the old way. But I, like most builders, have switched over to using a backer board. Again, a lot of builders use Durock. I don't like Durock because moisture can penetrate through the Durock. Here again is where I like the Den-Shield tile backer. And your ceramic tile sub will attach this to the walls. And remember, you left the drywall off in these areas. They will attach this to the walls, and on top of this tile backer, they put the ceramic tile. Now, where you have a tub or shower, a tub surround, do not let them run drywall down to the tub and you put the tile on top of the drywall. Because even though the tile may be non-porous, the joints are not, and water will seep through those joints, and that drywall will start breaking down and the tile simply fall off the wall. You can believe the number of homes I've seen builders do this. You want that tile backer up there. I mentioned earlier about not letting the framer build a seat in the shower. I want you to hire the ceramic tile sub to build the seats in the shower. He will normally build them out of concrete block, solid masonry seat, and put the tile on top of this concrete block. I think you get a much nicer, much neater job and a much more substantial, durable job by letting the tile sub build it out of concrete block, these shower seats, which I like. Again, look at 24/7 to see my suggestion on how to build the floor, a ceramic tile floor in a shower. And you can go over this sketch with your ceramic tile sub to see if you're on the same page. If he does it differently, question why he does it differently and see if it makes sense. Because I hate to be biased, but I think my sketch on doing the floor is the way it should be done. And it's not the only way. If it were me, I would go ahead and have the ceramic tile sub do any tile that's going around the fireplace opening, if that's what you're going to do. I would have him do this before the trim carpenter builds the fireplace surround. Now, if you're getting a fireplace surround that is already pre-constructed, in that case, you may want to go ahead and install that pre-constructed surround that's not going to be custom made, and then let the ceramic tile sub put their tile, marble, or whatever around the fireplace box if that's what you're going to do. Do not put any backsplash in the kitchen area at this time, and you'll understand why. A real nice item in like a master bath, as I mentioned earlier in the program, is to have a heated tile floor on a thermostat. Oh, that is just so nice. The ceramic tile sub is the person that's going to install this pad underneath the tile. You need to get with your tile supplier to find out what pads they sell. You can talk with your ceramic tile sub to see if he has pads he likes over other pads. You can do research yourself on the internet and decide what you want. But usually the company, the store that sells the tile, they have pads that they recommend to their customers, and that's probably what I would go with. And again, the ceramic tile sub is the person that installs this pad for your heated tile floors, and they know what to do. And if they don't, you better get another ceramic tile sub. When the ceramic tile sub completes his work, you'll have to pay the ceramic tile sub extra to do this, but they need to go in and seal all the tile and the grout joints. If you don't properly seal all the tile and grout joints, it can be a problem for you later if you stain the tile or the grout joints. It could be a real problem. One thing I love about going ahead and cleaning and sealing the tile is a lot of your different marbles and stuff like this will just bring out the color and the beauty of that marble. At 24/7, I'm going to be listing some products that I really like on sealing tiles. It's not cheap, but it's good stuff. Now, some of your tile maybe have a glaze on it, and you don't have to worry about necessarily sealing that, but you do have to be concerned about the grout joints. So even if you've got a glazed tile that nothing can penetrate it, the grout joints could still be a problem, and you've got to seal those. But hire the ceramic tile sub to go in, clean all the tile, and seal all the tile and grout joints. Just a few last items on the ceramic tile. Just like the hardwood flooring, I told you to run the hardwood flooring wall to wall, even underneath the cabinets. I feel the same way about ceramic tile. I think you get a much nicer, neater job. It's a lot easier on the ceramic tile sub. They just run the ceramic tile wall to wall, and then on top of that tile, they put your cabinets, vanities, whatever. I think it just turns out to be a lot nicer, a lot neater. You don't have near the aggravation. You don't have near the potential screw-ups. You do waste some tile, I'll admit, and some of this tile can be expensive. I just think you get a much nicer, neater job. So really think about that. That's what I would do if I were you. Another thing I want to mention that I mentioned earlier in the course, have the ceramic tile salesman measure your tile and order the tile. Because if they have a lot of tile left over, the problem with tile is if you don't get what you need and all of a sudden the lot that you bought from, they run out, then the matchup color can be a problem. Another problem is if you order too much and then you have tile left over, some of these tile companies, they do not want to take this tile back as credit. So you need to get real clear with the tile company, with the salesman, hey, I'm going to have your salesman measure, and if there's a lot of tile left over, I want you to take it back for credit. If they say, no, we're not going to be responsible, then I guess the only thing you can do is just triple check every measurement, have the tile sub measure, everybody measure, and you be sure before you order that tile, because that is a real hassle not being able to send this tile back for credit if you have a bunch of tile left over. One last thing, if you're doing any glass blocks, like in a window for a bathroom or a divider in a bathroom, for example, a lot of times your tile setters are the perfect people to do any glass blocks. After they finish this hardwood flooring, after they finish this ceramic tile on the floors, hopefully your cabinets are ready. You can now install all your cabinets. Your kitchen cabinets, your vanities, all your built-in items like bookcases and such as this. And most homes now, they deliver all the cabinets, and because most people will go with your solid surface countertops, it's after they deliver the cabinets that we measure for all the solid surface countertops.